Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really diving deep, looking at how we become subjects, how we know things through the eyes of Hegel and Žižek. We're using excerpts from Hegel's n.txt.
That's right. And fair warning, this is complex stuff.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
But our aim is to unpack it, make it engaging, because the core idea here is pretty radical, isn't it?
It really is. The idea that our sense of self, our grasp on reality, doesn't come from simple experience, but from breaks, from negation, from inherent limits.
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore how, according to these thinkers, the subject isn't a starting point, but emerges from a kind of fundamental rupture.
A failure, almost, in how we first encounter the world.
Okay, let's start there. Hegel's concept of sensibility. What's the basic idea?
Sensibility is, that initial feeling that the world is just there. We open our eyes, we touch something, and we think we're getting direct, unmediated access. Pure presence.
Like seeing red. It just is red.
Yeah.
Simple.
That's the naive belief. But Hegel says, hold on, even that immediate experience contains its own imminent negation.
What does that mean in practice? How does the immediate negate itself?
Well, try to focus on this specific red right now. Hegel argues it's already shifting, fading. The light changes, your attention wavers. The very act of trying to grasp its pure thisness reveals it's not stable, it's fleeting.
Okay. So you can't really pin it down perfectly.
Exactly. And that failure, that inability of the immediate to stay immediate, that's the critical moment.
Is that the first rupture the text talks about, the tear in reality?
That's it. The gap opens up between our attempt to grasp the purely present and the reality that it's always slipping away. And in that gap, the subject starts to form as something distinct from the object.
So we aren't just passively receiving anymore.
No. Žižek calls sensibility an ideology of presence, right? It's like a comforting story we tell ourselves that hides this fundamental lack, this gap. Even our most basic access is already structured, mediated by perception itself.
Right from the get-go, it's mediated.
Yeah.
Okay, so sensibility shows its limits. Then comes perception. How does that try to fix things?
Perception tries to stabilize the fleeting this. By giving it properties, putting it in categories, we say, okay, this isn't just a fleeting sensation, this is a thing with properties. Like, this table is brown, hard, square.
Connecting the particular experience to universals makes sense.
We try to grasp the particular within the universal, but Hegel says, well, this attempt also runs into trouble.
How so? What's the problem with perceiving properties?
The problem is that these properties, brown, hard, square, aren't inherent fixed qualities inside the table. Hegel argues they're actually relations, abstractions, differences.
How are they relations?
Well, think about hard. It only means something in relation to soft. Square is defined against round or other shapes. They exist through opposition, through difference from other things. They aren't self-contained bits of the table.
Okay, so the properties aren't solid building blocks, but more like a network of comparisons we impose.
Exactly, and this leads perception into contradictions. The table is perceived as one thing, yet it's also a multiplicity of these relational properties. It's a unity of opposites.
It's both one and many simultaneously.
Right, and this internal tension shows the perceived object isn't the stable, self-sufficient thing we thought perception would give us.
And Žižek calls the perceived object a fetish here. How does that connect?
He means the object, appearing solid with its properties, acts like a fetish. It allows us to focus on it and ignore the underlying void, or lack the initial rupture that makes perception possible in the first place.
So we fixate on the object to avoid the instability underneath.
Precisely. We hide the abyss of the subject, the fact that the eye perceiving isn't a given, but is constituted through this whole unstable process. Perception conceals the very conditions that bring it forth.
Wow. Okay, so sensibility breaks down. Perception tries to stabilize, but reveals contradictions. What's the next stage? Understanding.
Yes, understanding. This is where consciousness tries to impose a more robust order using concepts. We move beyond just perceiving properties to understanding functions, laws, forces. We try to define things, stabilize identities conceptually.
Applying abstract thought to make sense of it all.
Right, trying to finally heal that initial split. But, you guessed it,
It fails too. Why does understanding fall short?
because of its abstract nature. To define something, to create a concept like cup, you have to exclude everything that isn't a cup. You draw a line.
Okay, that seems necessary for definition.
It is, but that very act of exclusion, of abstracting, inevitably leaves things out. It simplifies, and in doing so, it actually produces the very ambiguity and messiness it was trying to eliminate. The boundaries are never quite clean.
So the attempt to create perfect conceptual order paradoxically highlights the disorder.
Exactly. Žižek sees understanding as this symbolic apparatus, language, logic, concepts, trying to banish the messy, chaotic real. But the harder it tries, the more the real pops up in the gaps, in the exceptions, in what the system can't quite capture.
And the dialectic isn't a method we apply, but the movement of the thing itself. What's that mean?
It means the contradictions aren't just in our heads, flaws in our thinking. The contradictions, the tensions, the way things constantly undermine their own definitions. That is the inherent movement of reality and thought itself. Thought hits its limits, and that collision drives it forward. It's not a tool, it's the process.
Which leads to consciousness emerging as a kind of unified awareness of this whole process.
Right. Consciousness arises as the experience, the realization that neither the object out there nor the subject in here is simply given. Both exist through this constant interplay of mediation, negation, self-negation.
It's the experience of the impossibility of immediacy.
Yes, a structural experience. You realize your connection to the world is never pure, never direct. It's always built on these earlier failures in mediations.
And this culminates in that major reversal. The subject is not origin, but effect.
That's the crux. We usually think, I am the starting point. Hegel, and Žižek echoes this, says no, the I, the subject, is the result of sensibility failing, the result of this structural rupture in the real.
Žižek's error in the system that begins to think itself.
Exactly. The system develops a glitch, a point of inconsistency, and the subject is that glitch becoming self-aware. It's a really deep way of thinking about what it means to be a subject.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, so the subject is an effect, born from rupture. Now, self-consciousness. How does the dive get deeper here?
Self-consciousness turns inward. The subject now confronts itself. But the self isn't whole. It's experienced, as the text says, like an open wound, a lack.
A lack. How so?
Because the self isn't self-sufficient. It only understands itself through the world and, crucially, through other selves. Its identity is mediated.
And this is where begehr desire comes in, not just hunger or thirst.
No, much more fundamental. Hegel's desire is structural. It's less about wanting a specific thing and more about wanting recognition, wanting to be desired by the other. As Žižek puts it, via Lacan, you desire desire itself.
So the object is just a stand-in.
Often, yes. It's a surrogate, a placeholder for this deeper dynamic of wanting the other's desire, which stems from that fundamental lack within the self. Lack isn't something to be filled, it's constitutive. It makes us who we are.
We're defined by what we lack, and our desire reflects that dependence on others.
Exactly. It shows our dependence, not autonomy. And this desire involves negation, but a productive one.
Productive how?
To become a self, you have to negate the world, differentiate yourself. But this negation creates something new. Your identity, your projects, your relationships. Like carving a statue negates the stone, but creates the form.
Desire fuels this creative negation, and for Žižek, this is where the symbolic order cracks.
Yes. Desire, acting on this lack, creates ruptures in the smooth surface of our symbolic world. It produces excess, moments where the underlying real kind of leaks through. These ruptures are where the subject truly emerges and acts.
And self-consciousness isn't static. It needs recognition from others.
Absolutely central for Hegel. You don't just know you're an I in isolation. You become an I when another I recognizes you as such. The other acts like a mirror.
But the mirror is flawed, right? The other is also split.
Precisely. The other has their own lacks, their own mediations. So the recognition they offer is never complete, never perfectly symmetrical. It's always fragmented.
Which leads to that paradoxical struggle. Wanting free recognition, but trying to force it makes it worthless.
A core human drama, isn't it? You want genuine acknowledgement, but compelling it destroys its value. It's a structural impossibility, this perfect symmetrical recognition.
And the master-servant dialectic illustrates this vividly.
It does. The master demands recognition, seems powerful. But the servant's fear-based recognition is empty. The master becomes dependent.
While the servant, through work, gains a different kind of awareness.
Yes, through labor, transforming the world, the servant engages with reality, gains skills, and actually moves closer to genuine self-consciousness. The power dynamic flips internally.
Žižek calls the master ideological and the servant symptomatic.
Right. The master lives in the illusion, the ideology of pure dominance. The servant, through their subjugated experience, embodies the symptom, the repressed truth of the system's contradictions, the master's dependency, the limits of power.
So self-consciousness remains this divided, conflicted process, never reaching a stable state. always defined by lack, conflict, mediation.
And that's the core insight. The subject is, as Žižek says, the error, that is, the system. The inconsistency is fundamental.
Okay, that's a heavy look at the subject's emergence. Now, the concept as movement of contradiction. How does thinking itself reflect this instability?
Hegel argues our concepts, the tools we use to understand, aren't static definitions. They're dynamic, always in motion, involving negation and self-transcendence. Thinking isn't about finding fixed truths, but engaging in this process.
And the dialectic is this inherent process, not just a method.
Exactly. It's the crisis of thought within thought itself. Concepts inevitably run into their own limits, generate contradictions, and this internal tension is the dialectic driving understanding forward.
And sublation, or Aufhebung, captures this, negating, preserving, elevating.
Yes, it's paradoxical. You move beyond something, but you don't just erase it. Its essence is preserved in the new, higher form. But Žižek notes it remains as a wound, a ghostly remainder.
So the past isn't fully overcome.
Never perfectly. Sublation is structurally incomplete. The negated element still haunts the present stage. Progress isn't clean.
And these contradictions aren't just our mistakes. They reflect reality itself.
That's Hegel's claim. Reality is inherently contradictory. So our thought, in grappling with it, necessarily becomes dialectical. Žižek pushes this. Forget thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's a cycle of failure, where attempts at wholeness create ruptures, and contradiction is the truth.
So the concept isn't a label, but the thing's own internal process. It's moving self-relation.
Right. The concept is the thing unfolding, developing, relating to itself, but it's never complete, always carrying its own potential negation. Žižek sees it as a machine of excess, always producing more than intended, always failing itself, but revealing truth in that failure.
And the triad, in itself, for itself, in and for itself, not neat stages.
No, a constant dialectical tension. In itself is potential, unrealized. For itself is self-aware, but separate, alienated. In and for itself is a kind of unity of being and consciousness, but crucially still shot through with contradiction.
Not a happy ending.
Definitely not. For Žižek, the in and for itself is where the subject knows it's not identical with itself and accepts that non-identity as its truth.
So even this supposed unity is torn, haunted by the ghost of what couldn't be fully integrated.
Exactly. Thought isn't master of itself. Žižek's quote is key. Progress isn't ascent to harmony, but a fall through the hole in the structure. But for Hegel, this failure is productive. It is the truth of movement.
Failure is the engine. Okay, let's widen the lens to Spiritgeist, collective subjectivity.
Yes. Society, history, culture. Spirit is the collective subject in motion. But like the individual, it's not complete, inherently alienated.
So when Hegel says the truth is the whole,
he means a whole that exists only as a process, moving through its own contradictions, not a static, finished picture. Spirit is history unfolding, encountering its own alienation, trying to recognize itself through social structures, ideologies, conflicts.
it's the unrest of history. And Žižek reads spirit as an ideological superego.
Kind of. The underlying social structure, the norms, the big other that shapes us. But it's an other that's also fundamentally missed, incomplete. The social order contains the very rupture through which the individual subject thinks critically.
And alienation here isn't just bad, it's a condition of production.
Counterintuitive, right. Hegel reverses it. Separation, division, becoming strange to oneself within society. That's how spirit experiences and knows itself. It needs that internal distance, that outside within the inside.
Origin is separation.
Yes. And Žižek says alienation is the truth. The idea of being perfectly at home with oneself is ideology. The real of the subject lies in its failure to coincide with itself.
This reframes everything. What about freedom in this context?
Not just random choice. Hegelian freedom is insight into necessity, understanding the structures that shape your desires and possibilities. For Žižek, it's acting through the system's contradictions, making a confrontational choice within that non-neutral framework.
And knowledge within spirit is always tangled with ideology.
Always. Collective knowledge operates through shared assumptions, biases. Ideology works best when we think we're just being objective. Truth emerges in the cracks, the places where knowledge admits its incompleteness, its exclusions.
Knowledge is always halved, produced through leaving things out.
And truth itself, for Hegel, is the self-movement of the contradictory whole. For Žižek, truth is what disturbs, the excess, the splinter that doesn't fit the system. It lives in the gap, the symptom.
So spirit isn't about overcoming alienation, but living within it, knowing negativity.
Exactly. dwelling in the contradictions. Freedom is finding agency within that rupture. Truth is the echo of the system's inherent failure.
Which brings us finally to absolute knowing, not omniscience then.
Not at all. It's the realization that the ultimate reality is this very movement of negativity, dialectic, failure. It's knowing the process itself.
Žižek's reconciliation with irreconciliation.
Perfectly put. Accepting the split.
How does religion fit in before that as a representation?
Hegel sees religion as spirit trying to grasp itself through images, stories, God representation, not pure concept. So it's an alienated semblance, projecting its truth onto another. Žižek adds, maybe we need that projection because facing the void directly is too much.
A necessary detour.
Perhaps. And reconciliation then isn't finding harmony.
It's seeing the split is the truth.
Accepting incompleteness, recognizing negativity as the structure. For Žižek, it's realizing there's no big other guaranteeing meaning. It's symbolic homelessness.
So absolute knowing is spirit seeing its own movement failure, negation, dialectic as the ultimate truth. Knowing its own limits is the completion.
Exactly. It's knowledge of one's own conditionality, seeing through the ideology, reflecting on the reflection process itself.
The absolute is the form in which the system recognizes its own rupture.
That nails it. Absolute knowing is realizing there is no outside. Truth isn't elsewhere. It's right here at the core as this constitutive void, this dynamic rupture.
So pulling all this together, this deep dive shows a picture where self and knowledge aren't built on rock, but emerge from cracks, from limits, from negation.
It's a challenging perspective, but incredibly powerful.
And failure isn't just error, but the engine, productive, the source of truth and movement.
It flips our usual assumptions about progress and understanding completely.
So the question for you listening is, how does this deep understanding of inherent lack of the subject as maybe an error reframe your own sense of self, your own search for knowledge?
Is this constant digging, this deep dive, ultimately about facing our own inescapable incompleteness?
And if it is, what possibilities does that open up? Something to definitely ponder. We hope you'll continue exploring these ideas. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.